Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. Not that you have to explain it, I don't think, but the President Trump pardoning all the January 6 people, most of them anyway, all but a few. No explanation should be needed, but the defense that the people who put them in jail and the left in general, the political left, said in reaction to it is, look, these people assaulted police officers and they have to be punished. Now, they've been in jail for a long time. They should have, all kinds of due process violations were inflicted against them. And there's a lot of things wrong with the January 6th deal. Now, after the event occurred, January 6, 2021, I said the day after it happened, I didn't understand what all the hoopla was about. I wouldn't have done, I wouldn't have went to the Capitol and marched on it and broke any windows and done any of that kind of stuff. But I understood the people who did. I shortly, in that time period, I think it was right after the election in November, I did reach out to some of the local Proud Boys people and offer myself up to be a member. It didn't work out because they're too much like a fraternity. There was a vetting, and I understand they didn't want people who are going to be narcs kind of getting in there and trying to undo them from inside, or being informants. Totally get that. I just offered myself. I knew we were at war against a political insurgency in the United States, and I was I had in my mind to contribute to getting things back to a constitutional basis. So I understood the people who marched on the Capitol, because at that time I was going through the application process to be a Proud Boy. And like I said, that didn't quite work out. They were too much of a brotherhood for me. I kind of offer myself as a leader and a general. I'm not a very good follower. I don't follow people at all. But I'm quite happy to be out front leading, and there was a pecking order, and I'm just not interested in pecking orders. So when but that period of time, from when Trump had the election taken in the middle of the night, and we knew there was election fraud. It was a matter of collecting the evidence and proving it, but we knew it happened. Some of us on the front lines. I saw early in the days, I saw a precinct map that showed where the election fraud occurred, because there were spikes in percentages where the vote counts were obviously manipulated. So everybody knew there was problems, and there was going to be a legal process. But the inauguration period for Biden to be inserted was much faster than you could process it through the courts, and that was part of the rigged game. So people were very upset about the stolen election, and I think the time has proven it. President Trump is back in office, and people kind of want to move on and live their lives. But the criticism of the January 6th prisoner issue can't go away, because there's an important distinction here. When is it okay to push back against the law? So if the enemy captures your legal system, they capture your police, because some political ideology comes into your local community, and then they establish law enforcement to enforce the laws they make. That's radical leftist. What are you supposed to do about it? How do you get recourse? How do you fight back against tyranny if tyranny takes control of your law? And that's clearly what happened with January 6th. That was the problem with January 6th. It wasn't that people broke the law. It's that people who controlled the law at the time sought to abuse people with tyranny, gain control of law enforcement, so they could then use them as their personal military force to bring left-wing politics into full swing. In this case, it was to cover up a coup that was orchestrated by the federal government against a sitting president. And these people wanted to put their guy in, Joe Biden, representative of the globalists, know-nothing, stagnant person that a bunch of administrators could write a blank check on and fill in whatever they wanted. And he was the figurehead that they knew they could manipulate. Compromised, easily manipulated to suit their needs. So we all saw this happening, and we wanted to take action. In my case, I was going to join the Proud Boys or whatever group wanted to go out there and fight on the front lines to fight all these Antifa thugs that were being brought up by the radical left. And we were really looking at an all-out war. I also remember at that time period, I traveled around expecting checkpoints because there was COVID lockdowns in that period. I expected to be pulled over and get in a shootout with unauthorized search and seizures, because constitutional violations were occurring, and we saw a government willing to manipulate circumstances to make it happen. Went through that with in Ohio with Governor DeWine. He's a Republican, but we saw constitutional violations everywhere. And when he was challenged in court and the lockdowns from COVID were pressed, they all lost. Every one of those constitutional violations lost. So we learned a lot about ourselves during this period. But that doesn't mean that these people who were arrested for the January 6th tyranny with the FBI, where there was baiting going on, which obviously there was, and the due process thrown out the window, and people were thrown in jail to basically send a message to everybody else: comply or this will happen to you. That wasn't justified. That was totally against the law. So the law enforcement people broke the law. And those people who on January 6th got mad and wanted to take back their capital had a right to do so. You can't just sit around and play patty cake with these people and let them get away with it. So there's a certain percentage of any population that if you push them too far, they're going to break and snap on you and go crazy. Now, that said, I have interacted over the years with thousands of police officers and people in law enforcement at all levels. And I genuinely like people who are law enforcement people. But that doesn't make them perfect. And they can serve whatever master is controlling their funding. So if the bad guys get in charge, law enforcement all of a sudden can become the enemy. And that was certainly the case with January 6th. They were being used by a political order to conduct a coup against a sitting president. And we were all supposed to sit and take it and obey the law and obey their tyranny. And at some point, you got to fight back. So saying what I said about I've known a lot of law enforcement people, I've had lots of contentious discussions with police, and I've never been in a situation where it got out of control, where you don't have a respectful discourse, and you still make your point. And I've never had a situation where it's ended up in court and went in a bad way. If you can stick with the Constitution, you typically come out well in those kinds of engagements, and you don't have to become a victim and go down the drain. I've known a lot of people who have ended up in jail. I've had to go get them out of jail. I've visited jails. I've been on all sides of it. I personally have not, because even if things get pretty bad, I've never found a situation where it got out of hand and you couldn't reason with people, because generally people are reasonable when you take all the emotion away. So I would not have expressed myself in the way that the January 6th people did, but by the Constitution, they had a right to do it. And they should not have been put in jail, and the government was wrong. When cops get out of control, they got to get a check on their power. And there's a way to do it, but a certain percentage of the population, if police abuse their power, they should expect to get it reined in on them. And sometimes that might mean physical altercation. We don't just sit by and let tyranny occur. You should let the courts process it, but we've seen how radical the courts are these days. We've seen the lawfare conducted against President Trump. And, not a lot of people have money to go through at lawyers to go fight those battles for them. They'll do it themselves. And the January 6th people were a percentage of the population that knew there was election fraud, and they were fighting against a government that was trying to conduct a coup. And rather than play the long game, they played the short game, and I see that as the government's fault, not the people who ended up in trouble. And they should have never been put in jail for any amount of time, one night, let alone 3 or 4 years. And as far as some of the Proud Boys that got put in jail to try and bust up the movement, and wreck the efforts. Knowing on the front lines a little bit, some of the people that are involved in that kind of thing, that is not for the government to dissuade people from joining such things or forming checks on government power, which is clearly what the arrest of the Proud Boys and some of the other groups were all about. Government does not have a right to impose itself the way it did with January 6 people, and they had every right in the world to be upset about it and to push back against a government that was out of control. And so the January 6th thing, the pardons are fully justified based on constitutional merits. If you follow the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th amendments, particularly of the Constitution, it's quite clear when a government doesn't respect those elements, because the Constitution is there to limit the powers of government. And when government takes those powers anyway, then they put themselves in a position where the pushback is warranted. And so there was no reason for any January 6th people to be punished at all because the government had overstepped its bounds. And when you do that, you don't honor the process of elections, and you try to play the games they played to insert their person in so they can gain more government power. People had a right to push back and fight against it, because if the government's not going to obey the law, then people are going to do what they're going to do. Everybody has to respect the law for it to work. That's why I said I've engaged with lots of police officers. I've never had a problem, and usually I can get the discussion to be a respectful discourse. All my life I've been able to do that. There's some really contentious situations. So I don't understand why people can't have those kinds of debates. But if the debates fall apart and the government imposes itself and they start getting pushy and start shoving around and abusing people's rights, and you don't think you can get a discourse in court, they have a right to fight back, and to fight back with violence. So calling it assaulting police officers, they don't get a free pass to abuse the law. And that's clearly what happened January 6th. So every single one of those people, and Trump was right to pardon them, should have happened sooner. Everybody had to wait until Trump was put in office. But one of the reasons he's put in office is to rectify some of those crimes that were committed against innocent people. Innocent because they could not stand by while their country was taken from them through election fraud. And that's what January 6th was all about. It's about election fraud conducted by the government, and they expected people to stand down. People got upset and fought back. And then they tried to throw them in jail to send a message: don't question the government. Don't question your parent. That's not how it works in the United States. If the government's not going to respect the Constitution, then you can't expect people to respect the limited powers that the Constitution is supposed to give on government when they show they're going to take it anyway. They had every right, the January 6 people, to fight back. So it's not assaulting police officers, it's correcting injustice. That's the only way to look at it. And thank goodness Trump has set things right, but you'll never be able to give back those people the time they lost, which is a crime in itself. But at least they're getting out of jail now and have a pardon and can live their lives. And a lot of people have learned a lot of hard lessons. And maybe in the future, the government won't be so inclined to do so. But if they do, people are warranted to fight back when the government doesn't respect the law and instead tries to use the law as a club to beat over people who can't defend themselves otherwise. And they deserved it. And I said it from the initial days after, and I still say it. It's a violation against people's rights as American people, and when the law gets out of control, you got to fight them any way that is possible, because otherwise they'll continue to abuse their power, and we can't stand for that. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.